In this video, we're going to talk about continuous domain and range and how to write that. All right, so for our notes, we are going to set up how the general setup is going to look for inequality notation versus interval notation. You need to be familiar with both. All right, so continuous, first of all, we know it's a continuous graph or table of values, or our graph for the most part is when all of our points are connected on the graph. They are all connected. They are not individual coordinates like you saw in discrete, and they're not random coordinates. So it's not going to be a list of coordinates. You're going to have more graphing type situations that are all connected, not just dots. Okay, so then next up, our inequality notation is when we have a number, we're going to have either less than or equal to our x, because we're talking about domain, and then we're still going to have less than or equal to. So it's always going to be in that format and then ending with our number. So you have kind of your general setup where you're always going to have your x, figure out which of the symbols you have, if it's equal to or not equal to, and then your values from lowest to highest. Same thing for the range. So our y is going to be in the middle. We're going to have a number on the far left, a number on the far right, and then our symbols could either be less than or equal to, because that represents it goes from the lowest to the highest. And then we'll talk about how do we know what that symbol looks like. Okay, for domain and range for interval notation is when we have brackets or parentheses. Okay, so a filled in circle, remember that that is our less than or equal to. With our brackets, that is the symbol that we use to represent the equal to symbol. Okay, so if it is an open circle, that means it is less than, or if we're doing our parentheses or interval notation, we're going to be using parentheses instead of our equal to. Okay, so we will have either a bracket or parentheses with the lowest number. We put a comma, and then we put the highest number with, again, bracket or parentheses on that end. So they could be interchanged. We could have a bracket with a parentheses or a parentheses with a bracket, or both of them the same. Those can be flipped around just like the inequality notation. So our range, we're looking at the y values for the lowest number, comma, versus the highest number. And then we could end up having brackets if it's equal to, or we could have parentheses if it is not equal to by those values. And realize we're talking about the x's for domain, the y's for our range. Okay, so how does that actually look in our graphs? Oh, and then the one little extra piece up here for our parentheses, if we have infinity or negative infinity, we're going to be using our parentheses for those, because you can never actually reach infinity. So that's just a little extra tip. Okay, so the way that I do my graphs, and maybe this is different from how you've learned your graphs, we're going to mark up our picture first to figure out what are the ending points and the edges of our graph of how far our numbers go, and then we will set up the different notations down below for both of them. Okay, so for my y values, if I'm doing the range first, I'm going up and down. So I like to make little brackets. There is actually a stopping point at that location, and down here there's a stopping point, and I do like a little bracket. I label that as my y, so later when I'm looking at my domain and range, I know which one I'm looking at. And then because it actually stops there, now I look at the type of circle. If it is a filled in circle, I actually just draw a filled in circle. If it is an open circle, I just draw an open circle. Yes, I know that I can see that on my graph, but that way I only have to look at my markings later when I'm writing my range. Okay, so then since it stops at that number, the question is, what is the number that the y value stops at? So if I look, that's stopping at 2. Down here, it is stopping down at -4 along my y-axis. And now all of those numbers is all I need to write the range in both notations. Okay, so now I'm going to mark it up for my x's as well. So now for my x's, I go from left to right. There's an actual stopping point, and there's a stopping point, and I label with my x. I look at my circles next. There's actually an open circle on this end. On the far right, there is a filled in circle. So I make sure I can tell the difference. And now I look at the numbers. This is counting by 2, so that's actually down at -8. And then the one on the far right side goes, I'm not looking up there at the 2, I'm looking at where does it cross the x-axis. That's at -2. All right, so for my inequality notation, if you remember, it's going to look like this. So I like to just prep with my x. I have my y in the middle. I need my numbers on both ends. And if you notice, I already wrote out what my numbers are going to be. We go lowest to highest. So for my x's, the lowest is the -8. The highest is -2. For my range, the lowest number is my -4, so that goes on the left. My highest number is a +2. So that's where your numbers are going to go when you set those up. And now I can go back and look at my inequality symbols. So that's where my open circle, closed circle comes in. So with my -8, it was an open circle. And we know open circle is my less than, or my parentheses, but we're not doing that one right now. So it's just my less than. Where the -2 is a closed circle. So I'm going to have =2 on that side. Now when I look at my range, I look at my circles. So with the -4 is my open circle. So that's just plain less than. With the 2 is a closed circle, so it's =2, so I make it =2 on that side. Okay, so how does that relate to my interval notation? The exact same numbers are going to be in those two locations. So you kind of think of your comma separating lowest number to highest number. So if you look at my brackets or look at what I've already written for my domain, the lowest number is -8. My highest number is a -2, and this time I don't label it with an X, because we would just leave it, we would label the outside being domain. And now for the parentheses brackets, again, I look at the type of circle. If it is a closed circle, I use a bracket, a hard bracket. If I use a open circle, it's a soft bracket or a parentheses. Sometimes you hear soft bracket because it doesn't have hard edges to it. So with my -8 is an open circle, so that's the side I'm going to have my soft bracket or my parentheses. The filled in circle is my hard bracket because that shows it is equal to that number. So I make sure you have hard pointy edges with your bracket to tell that it is different. And I do the same thing for my y's. So lowest to highest, so -4 to +2. And now look at your brackets. So filled in circle on my 2 is going to be my hard bracket on the 2. So make sure you got pointy edges. My -4 is an open. So that means I'm going to have my parentheses. So this time they actually are the same location of each of those brackets. That doesn't always happen that way. Okay, so that's when you have distinct numbers where they stop and start. So now look at number 2. Number 2 has an arrow. So when there's an arrow, that's where the infinity is going to come in, positive or negative, depending what direction it's going. Okay, we're still going to make our little brackets, and this is how I make it different if there is an arrow, because it keeps going off of your paper. So let's look at the x values. I have an actual starting point, so I'm going to have my little bracket there. Then, because there is no stopping point, it keeps going towards the right. The way that I do this is I actually just draw an arrow, because that tells me I'm not going to put a number there. I'm going to put infinity or negative infinity. Okay, so these are my x's. I can still go back to the first one. That's at 1, 2, 3, 4. So -4. There is a filled in circle to make a filled circle. On the far right side, infinity is going to be my soft bracket, or if you're thinking of an open circle or a closed circle, I'm going to use an open circle because that tells me later I'm going to use parentheses or a less than symbol. And then what direction is this going? Is this positive direction for your x's, or is that negative if I'm going to the right? That is a positive. So I use a positive infinity symbol there. So what does that look like for my inequalities? I still set up my x. I still go lowest to highest, so my -4, positive infinity. And now I look at my circles. Closed in is my equal to. Open circle is my not equal to. Okay, so then for the interval notation, same thing. I use my -4 infinity. So -4, comma, infinity. My -4 has the closed circle, so that means I have my hard bracket on that side. Infinity is my open circle because you can never actually reach it. Can't equal infinity. So that's why it's never going to be equal to whenever you have infinity. You're going to use the soft brackets or parentheses. Your open circle or less than are kind of tied together. So a little different if you see arrows. Okay, so then for the range, we'll do the same thing. The very bottom of my graph, there is a starting point, so I'm going to have my hard edge there, but then it looks like it's going to the right, but it's also going up at the same time. So technically, my top of my graph does not stop. So I'm going to have my arrow pointing up. These are my y's. Let's do numbers. So this is at 1, 2. So positive 2. There's a filled in circle. If it's going up, that is again positive infinity. It would have to go down if you want to do negative infinity. And then infinity is automatically going to be our open circle. So let's set up our range. Lowest to highest. So y goes in the middle, smallest number, biggest number. Then look at your circles. So we've got filled in, so that's going to be equal to. My infinity is going to be not equal to, so just less than. And then let's transfer that down to our interval notation, lowest to highest. Do the same thing. So your filled in circle is your hard bracket. Your parentheses is going to go with your infinity again. Okay, so one a little different to get some negative infinities and arrows and everything in there is this last one, because there's so many varieties that we could have with graphs. So if we're looking at our y values, if we want to do those first, the very top of the graph definitely has a stopping point. So I'm going to draw my hard line there. When I'm going down, this is where my arrow keeps on going because it keeps going with my graph down. Okay, so these are our y's. The top y value is up there right at 4, and it's definitely filled in. Even if there was no point there, because it continues all the way through, those are going to be filled in points. The y going down, if it's going down, is that positive or negative? That's going to be negative infinity. And then because it's infinity, we know it's going to be an open circle when I write it right next to it, because that'll help us later. Okay, so if we want to do the range first, we can. Lowest to highest, or your inequality notation, you get your number, symbol, y, symbol, and then your number. So lowest out of these two is actually the negative infinity, so this time it goes first. Highest is our 4. Now go back and look at your symbols. So not equal to for the infinity, and then equal to for the 4. So these two same pieces are brought down for your interval notation. We do negative infinity first, and then your 4. 4 again is our filled in circle, so that's our hard bracket. Parentheses is our open circle or soft bracket for the infinity side. Even if it's negative infinity, you can never actually reach it. Then for our domain, we do the same thing. So left to right. But if you notice, this is going down, but is there a stopping point? No, it keeps on spreading out. So to the right, it keeps going. To the left, it also keeps going in both directions. So I'm going to have arrows on both sides. This is still our x. Because it keeps on going, we know we're going to have our open circle, and we're definitely going to have infinities. So going to the right, if that is to the right, is that positive or negative? That's our positive infinity. To the left is going to be our negative infinity. So what does our domain look like? We have our x, your smallest to biggest, so negative infinity, positive infinity, leave some space. Then because it's infinity, remember we use our open circle or less than symbol whenever we're dealing with those. Okay, so domain, same thing, so negative infinity, comma, positive infinity. Because you have your open circle, we know it's going to be a hard bracket. Okay, so use these little marks next to your graph. You can even do that when you're on Eduphoria as well for different assignments, so that you can mark up this, because then these are the pieces that we can actually use over here. That way you can clearly see, does it keep going or not.